I have lived long enough to see summers so dry the earth split open, like the hide of an old horse. But none etched itself into my memory like the summer of 1886, when I was 20 years old and had just lost my husband. Sitting here on my porch now, cane at my side and a warm cup of tea on the table, I can still hear the sound of hoofbeats from that day, echoing across more than 60 years of my life. Two riders from our village came not to take me home, but to carry me farther than I had ever gone before. Chief Tahoma, my husband, was already fading. Fever had stolen his breath a little more each day, and I knew somehow that he had only enough strength left for one last request. He sent for Elias Cutter, a white man our people both respected and mistrusted. I had seen Cutter from a distance only a few times before, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that measured everything around him. I sat in the corner of the lodge, a woven shawl around my shoulders, as Cutter stepped inside. Tahoma looked at him, his voice rough but steady. "You saved my life once. Now I ask you to save my two wives. No brothers left, no one to protect them, keep them safe." I knew what those words meant, that my path was about to turn in a way I could never undo. Among the Apache, we do not hand our women over to outsiders lightly. But Tahoma trusted Cutter, and I trusted Tahoma. The next day, before the sun reached its highest, Clara and I were brought to Cutter's ranch. Clara was a little older than me, quieter, but her eyes missed nothing. The riders who delivered us turned their horses around without a word, leaving us in a slow-settling cloud of dust. Cutter stood by the corral rail, one hand resting on the post, looking at us like a man weighing a heavy decision. He only said, "House has 2 empty rooms. Well, water's good. Food's plain, but it'll fill you." We walked past him into the wooden house, its air thick with the scent of old pine and dust. I didn't know how long we'd stay, or what this strange new life would demand of me. But I did know this: my life no longer belonged to me alone. And the desert, with all the men it swallowed, was about to teach me a lesson I would never forget. The first mornings at Cutter's Ranch felt like waking up in a place that didn't know my name. The air was different from the valley where I had grown up, thinner, drier, carrying the faint smell of horse sweat and mesquite smoke. I rose early, as I always had, but here the sounds were strange. The creak of the windmill, the groan of the pump, the restless shuffle of horses in the corral. Cutter kept his words few. He moved about the yard with the quiet rhythm of a man who'd long since learned that talking didn't get a fence mended or a gate hinge fixed. Clara, ever watchful, walked the edges of the property on that first morning, her hands clasped behind her back, eyes scanning each corner like she was already judging whether this place could be defended. I found the kitchen a small, plain room with a stove scarred by years of fire, and began to make a pot of cornmeal mush from a sack I had spotted the day before. When Cutter came in, he nodded once in my direction but said nothing. Clara followed, her boots carrying a faint dust trail across the floorboards. We ate in near silence, the only sound the scrape of spoons and the tick of cooling metal. That same day, Cutter showed us the pump by the corral. "Old thing squeals loud enough to drive a man crazy," he said, pressing his weight down on the handle. Clara tried it next, her arms steady, her expression unreadable. I filled a bucket and carried it to the horses, feeling their warm breath on my hands as they nosed the water. By midday, the work had pulled a thin sheen of sweat across our backs. We paused under the shade of a mesquite tree, sharing a tin of water between us. "It was there," Cutter asked. "When the riders brought you here, did they say if anyone might come looking?" I met Clara's eyes before answering. "No one will come." The chief's word was final. She added, "His brothers are gone. His enemies have other battles now." It was the truth, or at least the truth we needed to believe. That night, the house felt larger than it had in the day. The wind moved through the eaves in long sighs, and the silence pressed in against the walls. I lay awake, wondering if the desert outside was holding its breath, or if it was only me. By the third day, I had learned the patterns of Cutter's land, the sound of the windmill turning, the way the fence lines cut the horizon into measured lengths, the low calls of cattle in the distance. It was quiet, but not the kind of quiet I trusted. The desert can hold its breath before it strikes. That morning, Cutter mentioned the northern fence. "Haven't been up there in a week," he said, tightening the cinch on his bay gelding. Rough ground. Good cover for anyone who wants to cross without being seen. He didn't need to say more. I knew we weren't just riding to mend wire. We set out, Clara taking the lead at times, her hand never far from the knife at her belt. I rode a little behind Cutter, scanning the land with the same care I would give to reading a river's current. The northern rise was dotted with mesquite and rock, a place where shadows could hide even in full daylight. Halfway along the fence, Cutter stopped. Two posts leaned inward, the wire slack. He dismounted and crouched low, pressing his fingers into the earth. "Boot print," he said. "Fresh less than 2 days." Clara joined him, eyes narrowing. They doubled back toward the ridge. Not our people. My pulse slowed into something heavier. Whoever it was, they'd been close enough to see the house if they'd wanted. We fixed the wire fast, Cutter working with a quiet urgency while Clara and I kept watch. The wind carried nothing but the smell of dry grass, but my shoulders stayed tight until we mounted up again. We took a longer route home, circling wide to see the land from every angle. The ranch looked small from a distance, too small to stand against trouble if it came in numbers. That evening, over a supper of beans and fresh bread, Cutter said, "From now on, no one steps outside alone. If you see dust or movement, you get inside and latch the door." Clara's chin lifted, but she didn't argue. I only nodded. I had lived long enough to know that sometimes staying alive meant letting the walls close in. It was a still morning, the kind where sound carries farther than it should. I was kneeling by the small garden patch, pulling weeds, when I felt the ground before I heard it, the faint, uneven thud of horses coming from the west. Cutter straightened from where he was working the gate and motioned for us to stop what we were doing. Clara stepped away from the corral, her knife at her belt, eyes narrowing toward the sound. 2 men appeared on the trail, white men, dusty from the ride, but with the kind of restlessness that wasn't from the road. The older one had pale eyes that never seemed to blink. The younger wore a grin that didn't belong to any honest visit. They stopped at the gate, the pale-eyed man calling out, "Morning. Heard there's some new company out this way." His gaze slid toward the porch, where I now stood with my arms folded. I met his stare without giving him a word. "This place is quiet," Cutter answered, voice steady. "You must have heard wrong." The younger man chuckled, leaning in his saddle. "Don't look like it to me." His eyes lingered on me in a way I'd seen before on battlefields. In trading posts, men weighing you not as a person, but as something to take. "We're not looking for trouble," the pale-eyed one said, though his tone carried the promise of it. "Just figure we'd stop in, offer a bit of company." "Not interested," Cutter replied. "You want to turn back before the sun gets higher." For a long moment, none of them moved. Then the older man caught his partner's arm. "We'll be on our way," he said with a smile that never touched his eyes. They turned their horses slow, looking over the place as if committing every board and fence post to memory. When their dust finally settled, Cutter stepped onto the porch. "If either of them comes back while I'm gone, you stay inside. You don't open the door, no matter what they say." Clara's jaw tightened. "We can handle ourselves." "I know," Cutter said. "But there's a difference between handling yourself and keeping a roof over your head without a fight you don't need." That night, the house felt smaller, the walls closer. And I knew in my bones those men weren't finished with us yet. 2 days passed after those riders left, but the quiet didn't sit right with me. It was the kind of silence that presses against your ears, as if the land itself is listening for something. Cutter kept busy mending fence, checking the herd, but I could see in the way he scanned the ridges that he was thinking the same thing I was. They'd be back. It was late afternoon when the dust appeared on the western trail. I saw it before the riders themselves, 3 this time, not 2. The pale-eyed one, his younger partner, and a third man, broad in the shoulders and wearing a black coat despite the heat. Men like that don't dress for comfort. They dress to send a message. They didn't bother with the gate this time. They rode straight into the yard. Cutter stood near the woodpile, his hand resting on the Winchester, eyes steady. Clara stepped out onto the porch beside me, her stance angled so she could see both the men and Cutter. The pale-eyed man spoke first. "You've had time to think. Cutter, we're here for them. No need to make it harder than it has to be. They're not going anywhere with you," Cutter said, voice calm but iron, hard. The man in the black coat let his gaze sweep over the house, the barn, the corral. "You can't keep this up forever," he said. "You ride into town, they'll be here alone. Or maybe we just wait until you're sleeping light and come through the back. Try it." Clara cut in, her voice sharp as flint. "And you'll find out how ready we are." The younger rider laughed, but it was too quick, and I saw a flicker of doubt cross his face. Cutter stepped forward, the rifle hanging easy in his grip, but I knew he could raise it faster than a rattler's strike. "You've been warned twice," he said. "A third time will end it." The pale-eyed man's smile thinned. He glanced at the black-coated one, who gave a slow nod. Without another word, they turned their horses and rode off, the younger one spitting into the dirt as they passed the porch. We watched until they disappeared beyond the ridge. Cutter didn't lower his rifle until the last hoofbeat faded. That night, the Winchester stayed on the kitchen table. The lamps burned low, and every sound outside felt like a signal. I slept in my boots. The night it happened was so still that even the crickets seemed to be holding their breath. I was asleep in the small back room, boots still on, my knife under the pillow, when I felt the shift. It wasn't sound at first, it was a kind of weight in the air. The way the dark settles differently when someone's out there. Cutter was on watch by the front window, Winchester across his knees. He didn't call out, just moved like a shadow through the house, touching Clara's shoulder first, then mine. "They're here," he whispered. That was all. Clara took her place near the back door, knife in hand, eyes hard. I moved to the side window with the old scattergun. Cutter had oiled the week before. Through the slats, I caught the faint glint of moonlight on metal, three figures moving low along the corral, one holding the horses. A shape crept toward the porch. Cutter waited until the first boot hit the step. "You take another one," he said, voice low but carrying, "and it'll be your last." The pale-eyed man froze. But the one in the black coat kept coming, hand going for his revolver. Cutter's shot splintered the post inches from his arm. The man jerked back with a curse. From the back, I heard a dull thud. Clara had slammed the door into the younger rider, knocking him against the wall. When he stumbled, she pressed the knife to his throat. "Not one more step," she said, steady as stone. I leveled the scattergun at the man holding the horses. "Drop the reins," I called. When he hesitated, I cocked the hammer, and the sound cut the night like a breaking bone. He froze, then let them fall. Cutter stepped out onto the porch, rifle raised. "You thought this place was unguarded. You were wrong. You don't get another try." The pale-eyed man looked between us three people who weren't bluffing and gave a short nod to his men. They backed off, mounted up, and rode into the dark without another word. Only when the hoofbeats were gone did Cutter lower the rifle. "If we see them again," he said, "it'll be on our terms." That night, for the first time since we came to Cutter's ranch, I felt the fear lift. Not because danger was gone, but because we'd shown at the door, and we'd kept it shut. By morning, the wind had picked up, carrying the smell of mesquite and dust across the yard. We sat at the table over coffee and cornbread, going over the night before in clipped sentences. Cutter said what we all already knew: men like that rarely stayed gone for good. And if they came back, it might be with more than three. He leaned back in his chair, eyes on us. "We go to town today," he said. "Not to ask for help, just to make it plain that anyone riding toward this place with bad intentions won't come back." The ride-in was steady, none of us talking much. We knew it wasn't supplies we were after, it was a message. When we reached the main street, Cutter didn't stop at the store or the smithy. He rode straight to the saloon and tied off his bay. Clara and I followed him inside, every head turning as the three of us stepped in. They were there. The pale-eyed rider, his younger partner, and the man in the black coat, sitting in a corner with their drinks. The room went quiet enough to hear boots shift on the floorboards. Cutter stopped a few feet from their table, his voice calm but carrying. "You stepped onto my land in the night. You threatened my people. That ends now. You so much as put a boot within sight of my fence again, and you'll be buried in the same dirt you rode over to get there." The pale-eyed man didn't answer right away. He looked at Cutter, then at us standing steady beside him, then around the room at the faces watching. Finally, he pushed his chair back and stood. "We're done," he said, flat as dry earth. "Wasn't worth it anyway." They walked out without looking back, but the whole saloon saw it. And out here, that meant the story would travel faster than any of us could ride. We picked up what little we needed from the store and headed home under a clear sky. The air felt lighter, like the land had loosened its grip on our shoulders. That evening, we ate on the porch. I set a small string of polished beads on the table, the ones the chief had kept near his bed. He trusted you for a reason, I told Cutter. Clara added, and now we stay because we choose to. Cutter looked at us both for a long moment before nodding. Then we're not just keeping the place running anymore. We're building something. And in that moment, I believed him. We came back from town under a sky so wide it felt like the whole world could see us. No riders on the trail behind, no dust rising on the horizon, just the steady rhythm of hooves and the creak of leather. But I knew better than to mistake the quiet for safety. Out here, trouble had a way of circling back when you least expected it. When we reached the ranch, we unloaded the supplies without a word. Clara stacked the flour and beans in the pantry. Cutter set the rifle on the table, and I stored the lamp oil by the door in case we needed to move in a hurry. It wasn't fear anymore, it was habit, the kind that keeps you alive. That night, we ate on the porch, the air soft and cool. I took the small string of polished beads from my pocket, the ones the chief had kept close in life. I set them on the table between us. He trusted you for a reason, I said to Cutter. Clara nodded. And now we stay because we choose to. Cutter looked at us, his face unreadable for a moment. Then he nodded once. Then we're not just keeping the place running anymore, he said. We're building something. It was a plain truth, but it settled in me like a promise. The fences would still need mending, the pump would still squeak, and storms would still roll in from the west. But those were the kinds of fights worth having, the kind you face together. Later, when the lamps were lit and the windows shut against the night air, there was no tension in the silence. Only the steady calm of a home claimed, kept, and defended. Out in the dark, the land lay still, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself believe the danger had passed. We had made our stand, and it had held. I am an old woman now. My hands are not as quick as they once were, and my eyes sometimes blur when the wind carries too much dust. But I remember that summer in every detail, as if the land itself carved it into my bones. I was 20 years old, proud, cautious, and still finding the shape of my place in the world. What happened at Cutter's Ranch set that shape for the rest of my days. The desert teaches you to measure time differently. A day can feel endless under a burning sun, and yet years slip past like shadows over the hills. I have lived long enough to see our valley change, fences pushed farther out, roads carved into old trails, and the river we once called the San Pedro narrowed by drought and men's hands. But whenever I ride past the ridge where you can see Cutter's place, I still see it as it was, a small fort of wood and grit, with 3 people inside holding the line against whatever might come. In the years after that standoff, no one dared ride into our yard with trouble in mind. Not because the world had suddenly turned kind, but because word had spread clear and sharp as a bell on cold air that Cutter's Ranch was not an easy place to take from. Men respected that, even the ones who didn't respect much else. I stayed. Clara stayed. Cutter never asked us to earn our keep, but we did anyway. We worked the fences, tended the horses, planted what small garden the soil would allow. We learned each other's rhythms, when to speak, when to leave the other to their thoughts, when to share a laugh to break the day's silence. In time, the quiet of the place became something different from the wary stillness of that first month. It became a peace we built ourselves. People often ask why I stayed with Cutter after the danger passed. Some think it was debt to the chief. Others think it was stubborn pride. The truth is simpler. I stayed because, in a land where so much was taken, this was a place where we could choose. We weren't bound by anything except the promise we made to each other that no matter what came over the horizon, we would meet it together. Cutter was not a man who spoke of feelings. His words were tools, used only when they were needed, like a good knife. But I learned to read the weight behind them and the silences between. He trusted me with more than chores. He trusted me with the safety of the ranch, with the watch at night, with decisions that mattered. That trust was worth more to me than any gift. There were still close calls. Once, a pair of strangers came through while Cutter was in the north pasture. They asked too many questions about who lived at the ranch. I sent them away before they got near the porch, the scattergun in plain view. Another time, we found signs near the south fence boot prints. Not ours, but whoever made them must have thought better of pressing on. We never learned their names, and they never learned ours. Clara and I became something like sisters, though we were different in almost every way. She was quick to act, quicker to speak her mind, and her knife was never far from her hand. I was slower, quieter, but I saw the turns in the road before we reached them. That balance kept us whole. If one of us faltered, the other would stand. As the seasons turned, the land gave us both hardship and reward. There were lean years when the cattle grew thin and the beans from the garden were small and bitter. And there were years when the grass came in thick and the rains filled the troughs without our hands on the pump. Through it all, we kept the place together, each repair and planting another stitch in the life we were making. Cutter grew older, as we all did. The lines in his face deepened, his hair silvered, but he never lost the set of his shoulders or the way his eyes scanned the horizon at first light. When the winter came that took him from us, it was quiet, no violence, no fever, just a slow easing, like the land letting go of the sun at dusk. He went the way he had lived, steady and without complaint. After we buried him on the rise west of the house, Clara and I sat on the porch until the stars came out, the way we had done with him so many times. We didn't speak much. There wasn't a need. We both knew what came next. We would keep the ranch as he had, not because we owed it to him, but because it was ours now, in every way that mattered. Years later, when Clara left to join her kin in the mountains, I stayed. By then, the ranch had weathered more storms than I could count, and so had I. Alone, I found a different kind of rhythm. The work was harder without a second pair of hands, but the land had a way of rewarding patience. I learned every sound the house made, every shadow the hills cast at different hours. That knowledge was its own kind of company. Now, as I sit here with the years heavy on me, I can still hear the hoofbeats from that summer. I can still see the pale-eyed rider at the gate, the way Cutter stood with the Winchester in his hands, the way Clara's jaw set when she told them to try it and see. I remember the feel of the scattergun against my shoulder, the weight of the beads in my pocket, the understanding in Cutter's eyes when he told us we were building something. Those moments never fade. I tell this story not because I think the world will forget us, but because the world changes faster than memory sometimes. Fences rot, rivers shift, and names wear thin in the telling. But the truth stays the same. There was a summer when three people different in blood and history stood together against the kind of men who take because they can. And we held. I've outlived many who thought they'd last forever. I've seen the land burn and bloom again. I've watched children grow into the same stubborn grit their grandparents carried. And through it all, I've kept the ranch. The house is smaller now than it seemed when I was 20, but the porch still catches the evening light in the same way. And the wind through the mesquite still carries that same low hum. When I am gone, I hope someone else will stand here and feel what I felt, that this place is more than wood and earth. It is a promise kept, a piece of ground claimed not by paper or law, but by the simple fact that we were willing to defend it, to work it, to make it ours. And if they listen close, maybe they'll still hear the echo of that summer, the hammer of a rifle being drawn back, the firm voice of a young woman saying, "Drop the reins," the sound of hoofbeats fading into the dark as danger turns away. Maybe they'll feel the weight of what it means to hold your ground. Because I have learned that a home worth defending is not just a place. It is the people who stand with you when the gate is tested. It is the courage to say no when saying nothing would be easier. And it is the quiet after, when you know in your bones that you've kept what matters. That summer taught me all of that, and I have carried it every day since. It was late autumn when I knew I would not see another spring. The cold settled deeper into my bones that year, and no fire, no matter how high I built it, could warm me through. Still, the ranch called for its work, and I did what I could, feeding the stock, checking the fences, moving slow but steady. The mornings were my favorite, even then. I'd take my coffee to the porch, watch the mist burn off the low ground, and let my eyes sweep the horizon. Old habit. A lifetime of scanning for riders that might not come. I hadn't seen trouble in years, but I kept looking, because looking had kept me alive. One morning, I caught sight of a lone horse standing just beyond the ridge. A bay with a white blaze, thin in the flanks but proud in its stance. No rider, no saddle. I watched it for a long while before going inside for my coat. It wasn't in me to leave a creature wandering hungry. It took the better part of an hour to bring the horse in. He spooked at my approach, but not enough to run. When I finally slipped a rope over his neck, I saw the old scar along his shoulder, something from years past, maybe a fence post or a cougar's swipe. He reminded me of the life I had led, marked but still standing. I kept him a week, feeding him oats, brushing the dust from his coat. But in the nights, when the wind rattled the shutters, I began to dream of that summer again. Cutter's voice telling me we were building something. Clara's laugh when the danger had passed, the sound of hoofbeats retreating into the dark. By the seventh morning, I knew what I had to do. I saddled the bay, packed only water and the old string of beads the chief had once kept by his bed. My hands shook more than I wanted to admit. But once I was in the saddle, the years fell away. The land looked the same as it had when I was 20, wide, untamed, and honest in its dangers. I rode south first, toward the river. The mesquite was thick there, and the air smelled of dust and water in equal measure. I stopped at the spot where Cutter and I had once found fresh boot prints and knew trouble was near. The prints were gone, worn away by time, but the memory was sharp enough to make me smile. By midday, I turned west toward the hills. My legs ached. My hands were stiff on the reins, but the rhythm of the ride carried me. Somewhere near the old freight trail, I spotted a cluster of riders in the distance too far to make out faces, but I knew they were ranchers moving cattle. For a moment, I thought about riding over, sharing coffee and news. Then I decided against it. This ride was mine alone. As the sun began to drop, I reached the high rise above Cutter's ranch. From here, you could see everything: the roof, the corral, the fences stretching like lines drawn against the desert. Smoke curled from the chimney. Whoever tended the place now was keeping it alive. That was enough for me. I sat there until the sky turned the deep orange of an old memory. I thought about all the years between that summer and this day. About the people who had come and gone, the storms weathered, the fights won. About the chief, Cutter, Clara. Every one of them had shaped the woman I became. When I finally turned the bay north, the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain. I pulled my coat tighter and leaned forward in the saddle. The land stretched ahead, open and waiting, and I rode into it without fear. I didn't know if I'd make it back by nightfall. It didn't matter. This was the last ride I needed to take, the kind that reminds you who you are and where you belong. And for me, that had always been the same answer. Out here, on this land, with the horizon wide and the promise of home at my back. They say the desert forgets nothing. The wind moves the sand, the sun bleaches the bones, the storms wash the trails away, but the land still knows. And if you've lived here long enough, you know it too. Every rise, every dry creek bed, every place where something happened, you can feel it in your chest before you see it. I am an old woman now. My hands ache in the mornings, my knees don't carry me far, and my braid has gone silver. But the land still speaks to me, just as it did when I was 20. Sometimes, in the blue light before sunrise, I step out onto the porch and the air feels thick with memory. I can almost hear Cutter's boots on the steps, Clara humming in the kitchen, the clink of a rifle's lever being worked in the quiet. I can almost smell the mesquite fire from that night we stood together, ready for men who never should have come. Most of the faces from those days are gone. Cutter passed many winters ago. Clara married a man from the southern range, raised children who never knew the weight of those weeks. And me, I stayed here. The ranch was never mine by paper, but it was mine in every way that mattered. I kept it running, kept it safe, kept it whole. That was the promise I had made to a dying chief. And to myself. People in town still remember the story, though it's changed in the telling. Some say we scared off a gang twice our size. Others claim Cutter killed 3 men and buried them under the mesquite. The truth is simpler and harder. We stood our ground, and we were ready to do what it took. That was enough. The land remembers the rest. It remembers the hoofbeats on the hardpan, the low voices outside the porch, the night air holding its breath before a fight. It remembers the weight of the silence after they rode away for the last time. And it remembers the life that came after the slow seasons of mending fences, the laughter of children born here, the sound of rain on the roof after a long drought. The land has seen it all, and it has held me through it. I know my time is nearly done. When the wind comes from the west and the mesquite flowers, I feel the pull of those who went before me. The chief, Cutter, Clara, even the horses we rode and buried here. When I go, I hope they bury me on the North Rise, where the grass comes early in spring and you can see the whole stretch of the San Pedro Valley. Not because I want to be remembered, but because I want to keep watching over this place, the way it has always watched over me. The desert forgets nothing. And when the wind moves through the mesquite, carrying the smell of rain, I like to think it will carry my story too quiet, but unbroken across the land we claimed, kept, and defended. When I think of that summer of 1886, the first thing I remember is not the fear. It is the light. The long evenings, when the sun would hang low and spill gold across the yard, the smell of mesquite smoke drifting from the stove, the sound of a pump handle squeaking in the distance, or the low, steady snort of a horse bedding down for the night. Those little things were what made the place feel alive. But wrapped inside that light was the shadow of what we faced. We were three people, Cutter, Clara, and I, holding onto a patch of land that had no reason to matter to anyone else, except that it was ours. And in that summer, we learned how quickly the world will test you to see if you mean to keep what's yours. I was 20 years old then, young enough to think that being unafraid was the same thing as being strong. I had grown up knowing loss raids, hunger, watching my people driven from the best waterholes into the dry ground. But what I learned that year was different. It was not about losing. It was about standing. When the chief, my husband, lay dying, he told Cutter to keep us safe. I didn't know then that those words would set the course of my life. The ranch was his, not ours. And yet we came to share it, to live under its roof, to see it not as a place of charity but as a home worth defending with our own hands. The danger began slow, a pair of strangers riding up, looking too long at what wasn't theirs. Then it sharpened, threats left hanging in the air, talk of what we might fetch to the right kind of buyer. In those days, a woman alone on the frontier was seen by some men as property for the taking. But we were not alone, and we were not property. I have often been asked why we didn't leave, why we didn't pack our few belongings and ride for the chief's kin, or deeper into Apache country, or even into some town where at least there were more eyes to watch the streets. My answer is always the same, because leaving would have told the world we had no claim here. And once you tell the world that, you never get your ground back. That summer taught me that safety is not something that can be given to you. It is not in the paper deed that says you own a place, nor in the sheriff's badge, nor in the promises of men who pass through. Safety is built by the people willing to stand and hold it day after day, in the quiet hours, in the small chores, in the watching and waiting. We made the ranch safe in ways no one could see from the road. Cutter worked the fences until they were tight enough to keep stock in and men out. Clara kept the doors and windows in good repair, hinges oiled so they'd open silently if we needed them to. I learned to keep my knife in reach and my eyes on the ridges. It was not fear that made us do these things. It was preparation, the kind that lets you sleep at night. I learned, too, that courage is not the absence of fear. It is what you do while you are afraid. I will not pretend that I did not lie awake some nights, listening for hoofbeats. I did. I will not pretend my heart did not pound when those men rode into the yard the second time, or the third. But the fear was not the important thing. The important thing was that we still met them at the porch, rifles ready, voices steady. And when the fight finally came in the dead of night, we were ready. Not because we had wanted it, but because we had prepared for it. We didn't win by shooting. Those shots were fired. We won because we made them understand, in every word and every look, that they would not take one step farther without paying dearly for it. After that night, something changed in all of us. The ranch felt different, lighter, in a way. We had passed a test, one I think every home faces sooner or later. We had made our stand, and it had held. In the years that followed, the story grew in the telling. People in town said we'd faced a gang twice our size. Some swore Cutter killed 3 men and buried them under the mesquite. The truth was simpler. We had faced 3 determined men with the will to take what wasn't theirs, and we had shown them a will greater than their own. That was the real lesson of that summer. The things worth having will always need defending, and the people worth loving are the ones who will stand and defend with you, even when the odds look poor. I stayed on the ranch long after Cutter was gone, long after Clara had moved south and started her family. I mended the fences, I raised the colts, I watched the seasons turn. My hair went silver, my knees grew stiff, but I never stopped walking the fence lines or scanning the ridges at first light. The habit was in me too deep, and the land rewarded that.